Hello and welcome again to another GDI Talent Acquisition Practice presentation. Today's program, Talent Acquisition Process for Candidates, is specifically designed to assist you, the candidate, to understand how GDI goes about the evaluation process. GDI brings substantial number of years of experience, a vast amount of industry knowledge, deep methodology, and consistent discipline to the process of recruiting top talent. You can learn more about our processes and more about our methodologies by going to www.gdirecruiting.com. You can also learn more by looking at the handout or the email that we sent you that takes this presentation to another level of detail. A good place to start today will be to talk a little bit about GDI's talent acquisition practice and who we are. Leadership, management, and technical staff requirements continually evolve, but the need for high-performing talent remains constant. Recruiting top talent into any manufacturing and distribution company requires a rigorous methodology and should never be left just to instincts. This process begins with a thorough understanding of the position and continues through a detailed vetting and structured interviewing process that determines each candidate's real abilities and real potential to succeed. Using proven assessment and evaluation processes, GDI's talent acquisition practice specializes in matching the best candidates with each position that we're engaged to fill. We have over 35 years of relationships with high-performing manufacturing and distribution industry talent, giving us unparalleled capabilities to fill almost any management and technical position within these industries. Our clients value our deep industry expertise, our deep and valuable insights, our rigorous candidate evaluation methodologies, and our commitment to the success of both clients and candidates. To learn more about our talent acquisition process, you can go to www.gdirecruiting.com. We have a full explanation of the practice and a full explanation of the methodologies there. All of our methodologies and all of our practices and all of our processes have started with research. Ours is a research-centric process for finding the best candidates. We've learned much through our research and research contributions from over 300 other organizations. We've learned that job competencies are the largest determinant of success, that 75% of the success in any job is really derived from one's competency, largely technical competency, of all that's involved in that job. Competency is something we look for, something we evaluate early in the process, for the simple reason that if a person doesn't have the competency for the job that we're interviewing for, then we really don't need to stretch the interviewing process out beyond that. This doesn't mean that the candidate's a bad person or a bad candidate. It just means their skill sets are not matched correctly with the requirements from our client. We've also learned that experience, interestingly enough, is a reasonably poor determinant for most of today's jobs. Today's jobs require current relevant experience, and experience oftentimes that was developed 10 or 20 years ago just doesn't work anymore. Look around you. Look at the purchasing organization. It's now dealing on a global basis with issues it never dealt with a decade ago. Look at your materials planning organization and look at the evolution from MRP to lean manufacturing and to agile manufacturing now. And there's planning and scheduling techniques today that weren't even known a decade ago. Look at sales and operations planning and how that's evolved. Look at market research capabilities and how they've evolved in the last 10 years as a result of internet and social media. And so experience, while it's important, it's not the most important determinant for today's jobs. In fact, one of the most important determinants is this thing called deliberate practice. We know candidates who deliberately practice, that is, learn that which they are weakest at and practice improving it, are more than 3 times, or have a greater than 3 times better probability of success than those who don't deliberately practice. So, of course, we look at a candidate and their ability to deliberately practice. We look at a candidate and look at what they're doing to improve themselves. Candidates who don't work to improve themselves likely are not going to be successful. We also have learned through research that job performance and success is mostly the result of disproportionate capabilities in just 7 characteristics. You're going to learn later in this presentation that there's about 18 characteristics, 5 of them being competency related, 13 of them being personal quality related, that we're going to look at. And of that, the first 7 of those characteristics tend to drive most of the success. Those 7 are job competency, followed by critical thinking skills, followed by communication skills, followed by ability to start oneself, personal initiative, followed by curiosity, imagination, and creativity. And those first 7 tell us about 94 to 99% of an individual's potential for success. We know that from research, and not just our research, but from research from about 300 other contributors as well. We know that structured interviews are 6 times more likely to properly profile a candidate than unstructured interviews. A structured interview is an interview that's been planned in advance. It's an interview where you ask candidate A and candidate B fundamentally the same questions, so you get comparative analytics. For some reason, the recruiting profession seems to think that based on instinct, they can make a decision as to who the best candidate is. And the data behind these interviews, these structured interviews, turns out to be a much greater predictor of success than just instincts. We've also discovered that to find and evaluate and vet great talent takes a lot of time. It takes more time than more than 90% of internal recruiters are apparently willing to spend, and more time than more than 80% of external for-hire recruiters are apparently willing to spend. This, in our research, was shocking to us. This concept of what I call checkbox recruiting does not yield the best candidates. We're so certain of this, we've written a book called Stop Hiring Misfits, and this is one of the key issues we talk about is how do you spend the appropriate amount of time with a candidate to get to know this candidate, to get to know the candidate's competencies, their levels of curiosity, their imagination, their creativity, their personal initiative. How do we get to know this candidate, to get to know their story, what drives them, what motivates them, what inspires them? And that takes time. You can't do it in 2 or 3 hours. According to one research project that we viewed, the average candidate for middle to senior management is hired with less than 4 hours of interviews. Less than 4 hours of interviews. In fact, most of them spend more time traveling to the interview than they spend in interviews. And this is why we have about a 50% turnover, we believe, in the middle to senior management ranks in a 2 to 3 year period of time. So if you look across the world, across the industrialized world, a position lasts for about 2.5 to 3 years at the most, and those people are usually moved out or moved aside. In other words, they didn't really do the job that the company expected, nor was the company what the candidate expected. Time with the candidate to help them understand the environment they're stepping into, time with the company to help them understand the candidate is an imperative. It is a mandate. It is not a nice to have. We have to find processes to help us do that, to make an inefficient process, a fundamentally inefficient process of recruiting, more efficient. It will never be perfectly efficient, but there are ways of using technology that can make it more efficient. So we did learn, as the last point, that technology can be both helpful and harmful to the recruiting process. So a lot of these resume parsing systems that try to go through the hundreds or thousands of resumes looking for key words turns out, for most part, to be ineffective. Not maybe efficient, but it's ineffective, and a lot of candidates, good candidates, are parsed out. So we know that process for screening resumes doesn't work. That's a poor use of technology in our opinion. We'll talk about how we do it in a little bit. We have a different kind of talent acquisition company. We're disciplined. We use methodology-driven talent identification and acquisition processes. We have proprietary processes that we've developed, and these have all been backed and supported by substantial research. Our methods have been developed from research-proven outcomes, where we've looked at retention rates after 2 years of individuals who've been hired using a variety of interviewing and hiring methods. And we've selected those that have the greatest probability of success. Our talent acquisition methodologies have been proven, as have our tools and our instruments. As I said earlier, we try to find the right mix of high-tech and high-touch. To keep things focused, we stick to the manufacturing and distribution industries because that's what we know. GDI Talent Acquisition Practice is part of GDI Consulting and Training Company. GDI Consulting and Training Company has been doing manufacturing and distribution industry consulting projects for 35 years. Projects from the boardroom to the storeroom, from North America to Europe to Asia to Australia. We've been doing projects all over the world. We understand people of cultures, people of different skill sets, people of different backgrounds. We have huge domain knowledge from the boardroom to the storeroom and all functions in between. And we know how to do this recruiting reasonably fast without compromising quality. At GDI's talent acquisition practice, we go beyond the typical talent acquisition or recruiting practice in terms of our objectives. Most recruiting firms look for the far right, say 15 to 16% of candidates. There is a normal distribution of candidate capabilities in the world. We don't look at the 16% best. We look at the 2% best. We are not looking for average, nor are we looking for good. We are looking for extraordinary performers. Because we know extraordinary performers in any position are promotable, and they end up in companies. We're always interviewing not just for the position the client has engaged us to interview for. We're interviewing for the promotion of that job. If they're asking us to interview for a materials manager, we're not just interviewing for a materials manager, we're interviewing for a director of supply chain management. If we're interviewing for a controller, corporate controller, we're also interviewing for a CFO. Because we're looking not just for the person who can do the job, but the person who can move forward and upward with the company. That's at the right 2% of the bell curve. To do this, we are going to evaluate you once you get into the process across 18 different factors. The first 7 I already talked briefly about: job competency, critical thinking, communication skills, personal initiative, curiosity, imagination, and creativity. We know that those 7 describe the bulk of the success factors for almost any job in a manufacturing or distribution company. But we're also going to look at decision-making, judgment, ambition, enthusiasm, team spirit, collegiality, integrity, courage, tenacity, discipline, and your confidence. So what's in yellow will represent your competencies. What's in blue will represent your personal qualities. And we will evaluate all 18 of those, but with special emphasis on the first 7. We will then be able to compare you against the job description, or what we call the superior talent competency model. Before we start any project, we take the client's job description and we work with the hiring managers to drill that thing down until we understand every element of the job, every element of their expectations of performance, every element of their definition of success, every element of their definition of minimal expectation. We'll establish first-year goals. And the reason we do this is when we interview you, we will share with you this superior talent competency model, so there should be no question in your mind what the client, your future employer, expects of you. We believe hiring is a two-way street. The company has a brand, you have a personal brand. Those two brands have to merge. Just as if two consumer product companies have to merge, those cultures of those companies have to merge for that merger to be successful. The same applies with you and the company that's hiring you. So that job competency model is not just for the client, It's for you. Make sure that you review it. A little hint in these recruiting processes, make sure that you've reviewed that competency model. Don't set it aside. Don't scan it. Don't just look at it very quickly. Study it. My counsel to you is study that model, because that model isn't just some academic piece. That model is the result of hours and hours of collaboration between our professionals and the client to try to come up with a reasonable set of expectations and descriptors and narratives for that job. We will then interview against that. The questions we will ask will have a lot to do with that competency model. And then we will plot the competency model, as you see here in the blue line, and we will then overlay how you interviewed against that competency model, and we will find the strengths, that is, where your line exceeds the competency model, and we'll look at the weaknesses, that is, where your line is inside the competency model, and that's areas of improvement. So you can imagine from this, not only can we now compare you with a model, we can compare you with every other candidate, and more importantly, and most importantly, when they hire you, the weaknesses, like where the red arrow is pointing, that becomes the company that you're working for, that becomes their area of concern to develop you. We're trying to not only match talent, but we're trying to build simultaneously a development plan for you. And by the way, that's the development plan that's shared with you, so you can start working on that yourself. No reason to wait for the company to start teaching this particular candidate how to be more enthusiastic, how to have greater spirit, or how to be a better colleague. That's something the candidate can work on themselves even before they're hired. So part of our process is a very high dignity process. There's nothing we'll say to the client we won't say to you, and vice versa. So we'll share this with you once this is developed. Now, to give you a sense of what you're stepping into, there's 6 major steps to the process. The first 3 are on this page. Specify, source, and evaluate. Specify is really about us working with the client to come up with that superior talent competency model. That's the whole point of step 1. It's a process where we collaborate with the clients to create an in-depth job competency model that precisely describes the core job competencies and personal qualities in the candidate. In other words, this is the way we make the process fair and dignified for you. Step 2 is how we found you. Step 2 is about sourcing, about how we go about identifying and finding the right kinds of candidates. We do that through our own contacts, through client-provided contacts, social media, job boards, old-fashioned digging. Perhaps we found you through a friend of a friend of a friend. We then screened the resumes using our process, and then we ultimately get down to the first interview with you, which is the phase 1 interview noted in the center of the page. This interview is called the GDI Lifestyle Compatibility Interview. You will spend about 1 to 1.5 hours on a video conference call with one of our professionals. They will ask you the same questions they ask every other candidate. And the whole idea is to find out, can you live in the community where the job is? Do you speak the appropriate language? Do you have the fundamental competencies or indication of competencies to do this job? The indication of leadership skills or managerial skills or technical skills to do this job? Is this job in the right pay range for you? Does the job provide the benefits that you need or want? And does the job bring some excitement or some passion or some interest to you? And so we're really looking in this first interview to really understand if there's a fundamental match. We would actually hope that in this interview that we rule out the bulk of the candidates. Not because we're trying to get it down to a small number, but if the pay isn't right for you, we don't want you to go through the process. We'll find another process with another company to put you through. If you're really a qualified candidate, we will not let you go until we find you a role somewhere. We don't want you to work in an environment that makes you feel uncomfortable. Maybe it's the type of company you don't want to work for. Maybe you're an ardent environmentalist and we may not want you to be an executive in a lumber company. And so this is where we look for the lifestyle compatibility issues. Should you make it through that process, we then put you through the phase 2 interview, which is the job competency interview. This could be 75 to 150 questions, particularly and specifically related to the job and the expectations of the job that we are hiring for. It's about 3 to 4 hours. It's a video conference interview. We can do all these video conferences face-to-face if you're in our town or in our area. But we don't see the need for us to fly or you to fly with today's great video conferencing techniques. And we've built our own platform, so it works pretty well for all parties involved. And so this interview, we can break it up in any way that's convenient for you. It doesn't have to be 4 hours in one setting. We can break it up a little bit, but this interview is really about asking you tough questions. Nobody ever answers all the questions correctly. We're as interested in how you answer as what you answer. And should you pass through that gate, then you go on to the next phase. Now, I might comment that if you don't make it through a gate, we will tell you as quickly as we possibly can, usually within a couple days. And we'll explain to you the reason why you didn't make it through. And we're not looking for you to sell yourself about why you could have done better, should have done better, because we'll counsel you how you can do better in the future. And we'll counsel you where we think some of your weaknesses are. At the end of phase 2, technical weaknesses show up quite often. And we'll be more than happy to share those with you. And so at any point in time, because you're giving a lot of time to go through this process, we will give back as much time as necessary to make sure you understand where your strengths, your weaknesses are, and to give you some coaching. So again, should you pass through phase 2, then you go to phase 3. We have you take a Clifton Strength Finders assessment instrument. That's an online assessment developed by Gallup. Over 12.5 million individuals have taken this, and this is designed around managerial and leadership strengths. So we're really looking at the ability to manage and lead other human beings. And it's a highly correlated, psychometrically tested, culturally tested exam. You do it online, probably requires 30 to 40 minutes. And you'll actually get the results back before we will. So you'll actually see this. And it's nobody ever gets hired as a result of this. It's just one more set of data points or data point for us. And then simultaneous to that, we'll arrange to do your GDI communication skills assessment, which is where we really assess your ability to write and your ability to speak and to sell your ideas. Should you pass that gate, you then go into phase 4 interview, which is the GDI Organizational Behavioral Assessment Instrument. And that's, again, another roughly 3.5 hour video conference of us asking questions around organizational and behavioral issues. It's an opportunity for you to talk to us about how you as a person work with people, how you as a person work in an organization. And it'll seem like we ask the same question several times, but in different ways, and that's exactly what we do. Because what we don't want to know is what you think you want us to know. We want to know you. Because if this is not the right job for you, we don't want you to take it. And if it's not the right job for you, we don't want the company to hire you either. So this is a point where we now know that you're technically qualified and you communicate well. Now it's all about personal. And then we're going to spend some time on that one. And then after that, then we fly to you for phase 5, or you fly to us, or we meet somewhere in between. And we spend about a half a day with you, 3 to 6 hours with you, in what we call a social interview. Totally unscripted. We have some points, some things we're trying to cover, but it's fairly laissez-faire and fairly ad hoc, and that we're going to try to view you in a social setting. And you're going to have an opportunity in that social setting to ask anything and talk about anything in the clients. By the time you've made it to this point in the interviewing process, we are as much your advocate as we are the client's recruiting firm. We now know that you have virtually all the technical and skill set qualities to do the job. This interview is about making sure that you have the social skills as well. It's also an opportunity for you to pepper us with every question imaginable, Because again, as we start to add the advocate process to our job duties, we want to make sure that we're honest with you about everything we can tell you regarding the client. And then should you make it through phase 5, all of your performance will be documented in a tool we call the Superior Performance Evaluation tool or instrument. And this is a report that we give to our clients that gives them detailed dossier on you. Not just what's in your resume, but all the scores and all the evaluations and all the conclusions we drew from all of these interviews. It's a fairly lengthy document. We usually put up to 3 or 4 people forward. If we put 4 people forward, it's usually about a 120-page document. And each candidate there's about 20, 25 pages that describes each candidate's strengths and weaknesses around those 18 characteristics, and about leadership and management as well. And so we will provide that. At the same time, we'll be doing the profiling, which is step number 4, and that's really doing your background check, your reference check, and your credential checking. And so we will be calling people who know you. We'll be calling people that you've told us to. By the way, you'll give us permission on all of these, on all of the references that you gave us, all of the background information. You'll have to sign off on all of that. And the same thing with credentialing, degrees and licenses and things like that. You will give us permission to get that information. It'll be a signed document that you'll fill out and sign. Gives us the permission. You'll also, by the way, just a side note, for those of you who are gainfully employed as you're going through this process, you need to make sure we know that at the very beginning of the process, so we keep everything confidential. We have a separate process internally to make sure that anybody who is employed, we have a separate process that keeps them confidential, right down to code names for you and everything, because we do not want to hurt your current employment situation. At this point in time, the client now has the Superior Talent Evaluation Report, and they're going to then interview you, and they're going to do those interviews of you. And we're not going to participate in those interviews. We're not even going to be on site. We're not going to be engaged. At that point in time, the client's had ample time to go through the report. We've had 1 or 2 meetings with them to go over each candidate's strengths and weaknesses, and we help them work on a way to do the interview with you. So normally what they'll do is they'll do all the interviews of the candidates in a 2 or 3 day period of time and make a decision usually on the 4th day. That usually is the process. Could stretch out, could get a little bit faster, but that's generally the process. And then the 5th step in this whole process is to engage you, and so they'll work up the employment letter. We have standard templates. We sometimes work with clients to help them, but generally they do that on their own. And then phase 6, or step 6, is the onboarding. So the client will occasionally engage us to work with you specifically, to go through and to get you to know the company. Will put together what's called an onboarding book. That's an optional step that the client has to engage us to do. But that onboarding book, you get days, weeks, months in advance of your start date, and you can learn as much about the company as possible. So it's a way of getting you up to date faster. Now, irrespective of all of that, we will contact you prior to your start date, and we will go over everything we learned about you in the evaluation process. We will give you all of the presentation material that we gave to the client relative to you, not the other candidates, but just you. And we will spend time in another video conference working with you on that, because we will be glad to tell you where we think your strengths are, glad to tell you where we think your weaknesses are, and glad to recommend an enhancement and improvement plan for you. You know, you spent a lot of time in this process, and we really want to make sure that you get the benefits of all the information and all the knowledge that we have. Through this whole process, you progress through 7 different recruiting activities that you actively participate in. The one is that GDI lifestyle. Let's think about that as a gate. Think of this as the new product introduction phased gate process. It's the same sort of logic. So gate 1 is you have to pass through that lifestyle compatibility interview. At the end of that interview, you either pass or don't pass. If you pass, you go to gate 2, which is the Clifton Strengths Finders assessment and the GDI job competency interview. And if you pass that, you go through the GDI communication skills assessment, followed by the GDI organization and behavioral assessment, and any optional testing if necessary. I didn't talk about that prior to this, but occasionally we find that an individual, we're just something we're uncertain of, so we may use some additional third-party assessments. So, for example, one that we've used is the Watson-Glasser 2 evaluation of critical thinking skills. Over 40 million people worldwide have taken this test over the last 50 years. It's highly correlated. If it indicates a high level of critical thinking, one can rest assured that that person has a high level of critical thinking. So that's just one. There's lots of others. And we actually don't do many of these because our process is so comprehensive and so complete, we rarely need to do those optional tests. Gate 5 is the social interview. Should you pass that, then you go to the background checks, credential checks, reference checking, and the structured client interviews. So there's really 7 gates you have to pass. We have had candidates that have failed out at each one of these levels. We have had plenty of candidates that don't get out of the compatibility interview. They don't pass that because they don't want to work in Florida or wherever. We've had them that have failed on step 2 because they didn't have the level of competency that was needed for the particular job. We've had them fail at step 3 because they couldn't write a decent memo, nor could they sell their ideas in a presentation. We've had them fail at step 4 because they didn't have the leadership skills. They had the technical, but not the leadership, and it was primarily a leadership-centric job. We've had them fail at step 5 because they were so socially awkward that the company just wouldn't know how to use them in a position that required an outgoing social sort of personal role. And we've of course had them fail background checks, and the one I tell everybody up front is if it's on your resume and if you've told it to us, it needs to be true. And failure to tell us something that we discover later goes, in our opinion, goes to bad judgment. So if you have something on your criminal record from 10 or 15 years ago, we need to know about it. Our position generally is anything over 7 or 8 years old is irrelevant, but we need to know about it because we can't be surprised if the client does a separate background interview or background check and that shows up. In other words, we want to be proactive to warn the client and to tell them why it's irrelevant now. And so we've had candidates at 50 years of age, something shows up on their record that's probably not supposed to, but it shows up on their record of when they were 18 years old. You know, they went streaking in college or got arrested for drunk in public in college. And here now, 20 or 30 years later, it shows up, and we want to make sure the client understands that was an indiscretion of youth and is irrelevant. And so we don't even share with the client that issue. We just share with the client that there's an irrelevant indiscretion of youth activity that happened, and if they want to know more about it, talk to us personally about it. In other words, we're interested in maintaining the dignity of this process. We're not out to embarrass anybody, but to keep from being embarrassed and to keep from anybody being embarrassed, we have to know everything. And so we've had them fail out of 6. And of course, when we put 3 or 4 candidates forward to a client, only one's going to get the job. Well, mostly. We've actually had clients hire more than one because one of the other candidates was so good they made a job for that candidate. So usually what happens when we put the 3 or 4 candidates in front of the client, they're pretty amazed at the quality of all of them. But still, they usually only select one for the job. So the first several interviews are all video conference interviews. So we try to make interviewing technology both personal and efficient. So here's an example of a screen. This is what you're looking at if you're interviewing for, in this case, maybe a purchasing manager position. So we would have a predefined time where we'd get together. The interviewer, in this case, Amanda is interviewing you, John. And so both people can see both people on the interview. All it requires is a laptop and a camera, or a desktop and a camera. And we would have the question in the middle that we're going to ask you. And there's going to be one question after another. We use the Citrix GoToMeeting as the connection process. So your desktop is over to the right side, and to the left side, you'll see, based on the orange boxes and the 18 qualities and competencies, you'll see what this question's really trying to get at. We don't hide that from you. This particular narrative question on sourcing and procurement management that's on the screen now is really designed to give us information about your job competency, your critical thinking skill, and your level of curiosity. So it serves three purposes. And so notice this question is a narrative question. So there's no true, false, there's no multiple choice, although there are some of those. But in this case, it's a narrative question that requires a narrative answer. Those kinds of questions always are around critical thinking, because we're looking at how you would answer it as well as what you answer. We're looking at your thinking process. So all these interviews using this proprietary video-based interviewing platform really brings you and our interviewer, really brings you face-to-face without having to spend all the money and all the time of traveling. You know, if we're going to go through 3 or 4 interviews, we don't want you traveling 3 or 4 times. Interestingly enough, everybody we interview will go through about 4 interviews with us, and then a social interview, and then a client interview. And mostly they make no trips. Usually we go to them for the social interview, and the only trip they make is the one with the client. So we're able to dramatically reduce your travel time and our travel expenses by doing these in a virtual video setting. In the lifestyle compatibility interview, there's really 15 categories of questions that we can select from. We have predefined over 450 questions. We don't ask that many. In this interview, there's probably 40 or 50 questions asked, maybe not even that. But those questions fall into these 15 categories. The first one is red flag resume questions. These are questions that are specific to your resume, like there's a 4-year period of time in your resume that's blank that we can't figure out what you were doing. You left a job in 2002 and you didn't start the new job until 2006. There's 4 years. We need to know what that's all about. And so the red flags are questions that are derived directly from your resume. Then we go into questions about past jobs, lifestyle requirements, where you like to live, what kind of hours you like to work, things like that. And then compensation requirements. And you can expect in this interview, if the job pays $180,000 a year and your requirement is no less than $300,000, the interview will end very quickly. And we will tell you the reason why. And if you say, well, no, I'll rethink my comp requirements, we may continue on. But otherwise, we won't, because it's not productive for you or for us. We'll also talk about your intentions and desires, and then we'll go over some relevant experience and background. And then we'll do some job competency screen, just a few questions, maybe 3, 4 questions at the most, that helps to indicate whether we should take you to the competency interview or not. And the same thing with personal initiative, curiosity, and imagination, creativity. We'll also do a little technology literacy screen to see how competent you are at modern technologies, and a little bit of decision and judgment and job satisfaction, and other information gathering that might be necessary. So 13 of these 15 really pull from our 450 pre-designed questions. And those questions will be used, and whatever we ask you, we'll generally ask everybody that's interviewing for that position. Should you get past the compatibility, lifestyle compatibility interview and make it into the job competency interview, we draw from over 1,700 questions in 30 categories. Questions related to the enterprise, or questions related to end-to-end supply chain, or questions related to production management, or sales, or change management, or facilities design. You could read them. I won't go through them all there. In this case, whatever job we're interviewing for, we've concluded that there are questions from all the areas that are in orange that we need to ask to test or to evaluate this person's competency. So whatever job this is, we've said that we are going to select from our 1,700 pre-designed questions around manufacturing, plant management, production management, materials flow and handling, warehouse management, distribution management, information technology, quality management, strategy, and functional interfaces. And the rest we won't ask. But there may be 75 to 150 of those questions in that 3 to 4 hour video interview. And then should you make it past that and you end up in the organizational behavioral assessment, the same thing. We're looking for, out of our 475 pre-designed questions, we're looking for questions in conflict management, people development, work-life balance, inspiration and motivation. And then after that, we're looking for the remaining 11 competencies and personal qualities that we didn't deal with up front. So we're looking for questions around decision-making, judgment, ambition, enthusiasm, team spirit, collegiality, integrity, courage, tenacity, discipline, and self-confidence. And so the orange boxes, again, represent the categories that we're drawing from for that specific job that we're interviewing for in that specific company. Now, you might ask why we use that Clifton Strength Finder assessment that I mentioned earlier. That's an online assessment that you'll take that'll give us information about 4 of your themes, of your persona, of your person. One is about how you work with people, and that's called the relating themes. The other one is about how you influence or are influenced by other people, and that's called impacting themes. Another one is how hard you work, what kind of worker you are, and that's really about striving themes. And then the other is how you work smarter, and that's about how you think about work and work content. So this tends to provide some validation to our direct interviewing processes. In each of these categories, there's numerous themes. So for example, in thinking themes, there are 12 unique themes in there. And for relating themes, there's 6 or 7 themes in there. In fact, we can reorganize those themes. Here's all 34 themes. And then we can organize them and say, well, there are themes that support the leadership capability called execution, or the leadership capability called influencing, or the leadership capability called relationship, or the leadership capability called strategic thinking. And so if you are really dominant in activating and commanding and communication and competition, this may suggest that you are a leader that comes at leadership through the ability to influence others versus through more of a relationship process. If you turn out to be a highly analytical, context-driven, futuristic person that focuses heavy on idea generation or ideation, as we call it, then that means you're more of a strategic leader. You're always looking at the bigger picture and the longer term. You're more of a leader than a manager. If you're about achieving, arranging, consistency and deliberative and highly disciplined, you're probably more of a manager than a leader. Managing being planning, directing, organizing, staffing, and controlling. Leading being moving people in a common direction. And so the Clifton Strength Finder assessment gives us another data point, another data set to indicate where you're most likely to succeed. And I hope by now what you understand about our process is it's a two-way process. We are not just interested in filling a spot at the client. We're interested in that, but equally in what will make you successful. A butterfly cannot be a frog. A horse cannot be a wolf. And you cannot be successful unless you're in an environment that allows you to be successful. We want that for you because we want our candidates to not only do a great job, but we want them to get promoted as well. Now, we have a methodology. I'm going to make you squint if you want to read this. I'm not going to go through it. But I will tell you this. Everywhere you see a red line on there, that's a down selection point where we down select. All the blues are activities, and the blacks are all around background and reference checking. And the green up at the top, those are just where we give weekly status reports at the end of every week to our client. So our process is a highly organized, highly disciplined process. It's designed to find even the toughest of candidates to fill the toughest of positions in 90 days. We've done it faster than that, but the standard plan says, let's do it in 90 days. And that's important to us. You know, we get clients all the time who says, look, can't you just give me 3 resumes and I'll do the interview? And the answer is no. Go get the 3 resumes yourself. If you're really interested in having the best possible talent that can grow your business, support your business, really provide huge value to your business, you'll go through this process. We do this process as a retained search, so the client pays us a retained. It's a consulting fee. It's not a contingent. We are not contingency consulting recruiters. We are talent acquisition professionals that really look and know what to do and know what questions to ask and how to find out the background of a person. So again, back to my earlier comment, share everything you can with us because it'll help us to understand you. Now, there's 7 rules in the process that you as a candidate need to understand. The first rule is this is as much about satisfying your needs as it is about satisfying our clients' needs. Feel free to put on the interviewer hat and feel free to interview us and interview the client when you get to meet the client about their company as well. Feel free to wonder about why you should work for them, not just why they should hire you. Second rule, do not go around us and contact client personnel without talking to us first. This confuses the process and damages our candidate comparison process. It also goes to judgment. We've had candidates who've done this, who get tired of going through the process and just out of frustration go to the client and go, look, I'm the best thing. I shouldn't have to go through all these processes. And the clients 100% of the time send them away because they say that's just a frustrated, impatient individual. It does those individuals more harm than it does them good. Answer all interview questions that we ask you and the client as well, honestly. Do not tell us what you think we want to hear. Set the personal brand aside. Set the marketing image you're trying to create for yourself aside and just answer the questions honestly. Do the best you can. If you mislead us, we're going to discover it more than likely anyways. And ask us anything. As your recruiters, we're also your advocates. It's a weird role, I understand that. But we'll share everything about our client that we can that they've allowed us to share, which is almost always everything. If we can't share something with you, we'll tell you what it is and we'll tell you why. We'll tell you why we can't tell you. Fifth rule, take this process seriously. In your career, you will probably never go through this type of interview again. These interviews are serious events for serious people. We are very serious about them. We expect you to be serious also. Even if the client doesn't hire you, because we're going to brief you on everything we've learned about you, this can be invaluable coaching that you didn't have to pay for. Take advantage of it as much as you can. I'm serious about that. This is such a great opportunity if you've never been through this, even if you don't get hired, that you should really participate heavily. 6, be available when we need to talk to you. So we need to have ways to get a hold of you, and you need to return our calls or emails fairly quickly after we contact you. We understand issues. If you're in the middle of an interview with some other company, you need to ignore our voicemail or email. I understand that. We all understand that. But get back to us as soon as you can. By the way, one of the questions we're going to ask early on in the process, back in the lifestyle compatibility, is are you interviewing with any other company? And we don't need to know, although we like to, we don't need to know what other companies you're interviewing with. But we absolutely need to know if you're interviewing with somebody else. And it needs to be honest. It can't be used as a pressure tactic. We really need to know because if you are interviewing or you do have an offer or a preliminary offer, and if our client wants you, we don't want to lose you. If we think you're the right candidate for our client and you've got something else going, we want to know about it because our advocacy role kicks in and says to our client, you're going to lose them unless you do such and such. And so you need to not only be available to talk to us, but you need to let us know what's going on in your job search. It's between us. We're not going to do anything with it other than that which works in your favor if the client really wants you. And finally, try to learn something about yourself from this process. So many candidates have told us after the interviewing process that it taught them things that they never really thought of about themselves, and that many things they didn't even understand. So enjoy the process. I know it's a bunch of time you're going to go through. We'll try to compress it as much as we can. I'll make that commitment to you, but try to enjoy the process as much as possible. Now I want to make some commitments to you, and I'm going to make them through sharing with you GDI Talent Acquisition Practice's belief and value system. First, we believe that people are the most valuable asset in any enterprise. This is why we go so overboard in the evaluation process. Second, we believe in the value of the individual. The right individual in any organization can and often does make a substantial difference. It's one of those things that is so amazing when a company gets the right person that just makes the difficult look easy. It is so amazing the changes that one person catalyzes in a company. 3, we believe in manufacturing as a societal value creator. Manufacturing is at the very core of any affluent society. I share this with you because I want you to understand we don't just focus on manufacturing and distribution as our markets. We focus there because we know those industries and because we love those industries and because we believe they add immense societal value that's oftentimes underestimated and underdiscussed. 4, we believe our talent acquisition practice must always bring value to both the candidate and the hiring company. A job placement has to be right for both the candidate and the company for it to be right in the first place. 5, we believe that most companies have not invested appropriately in their recruiting methods and generally do not possess internal capabilities to execute talent acquisition excellently. That's what we try to do. We are on a push to convince companies either spend the time and do the process or some process similar to what we do or engage us. But to do the little checklist sort of recruiting process just doesn't work anymore. Not in a world where people are smarter than ever before, more mobile than ever before, and more capable and willing to jump ship than ever before. We have to focus on talent acquisition and talent retention if we want to grow our companies. These are not HR functions. These are core competencies. I'll repeat, talent acquisition and retention is not an HR function. It is a core competency of the enterprise. 6, we believe talent acquisition should be approached with methodology and not just instinct. Interviews should be structured and fact-based comparatives. Candidate information should be developed from these interviews that can be compared against one another. 7, we believe that efficient talent acquisition requires close client and recruiter collaboration in the development of the job and company's specific competency model. 8, we believe job competency is a disproportionate determinant of job success and that all job success begins with a high level of competency. In other words, that job competency interview, phase 2 interview, is so important. And that's where the bulk of the people are not going to pass through that gate because they don't have the skill sets that the client needs. It's not their fault, and it doesn't make them bad candidates. It just makes them a mismatch. If they were hired, they would be a misfit. We want to stop misfits from being hired. We believe a talent acquisition process must be executed with the highest levels of mutual respect and dignity. We always want to treat you with dignity. Treating the client with dignity comes naturally. We really want to work at treating you with dignity. We all, by the way, we all have looked for jobs ourselves in our lives, and we all know what it feels like. We all know the difficulties. We all know the emotional problems. We know the economic problems. We know all of those, and we don't want to add to any of that. And that means that everything we do, and I tell this to everybody in our organization, we need to focus on dignity. We believe every serious candidate is a potential future client and or candidate in another company. So not only do we treat you with dignity because it's the right thing to do, but we believe, in fact, there's already solid evidence, if we treat people right, and even if our client doesn't hire them, they'll get hired somewhere else, and they will call us as a result of a good experience with us to help with their searches. So we are going to treat you as if you're going to be a future client. We believe we have an obligation to provide every phase 3, that's the communications interview and beyond, rejected a candidate with an honest appraisal, an improvement path, and some level of value-added coaching. So we're going to give you the coaching if you fall out of the process. If you don't want it, that's fine, but we're going to offer it anyways. And we believe also that the way we execute talent acquisition is not for every company. It's only going to appeal to companies that value true talent acquisition over traditional headhunting. So I tell everybody this: companies that have engaged us, right off the bat, you know they have a more progressive view of human asset management. Companies that are just engaging contingency headhunters don't have that same view. We have 8 values in our value system at GDI Talent Acquisition Practice. We value evidence-based talent acquisition. We value deep, well-constructed competency models, uniquely configured for each company. We value framework-centric methodologies in recruiting. We value structured and well-prepared interviews. By the way, you should know that those interviews take us as much time to prepare for as they do to deliver. We value independent candidate references that only proactive and diligent reference mining can deliver. So we're going to be looking for references other than the ones you give to us, because we want to really understand the package that our client is buying. We value analysis of the whole person and the uniqueness in any candidate. 7, we value dignity and respect, especially with job seekers. And we also value, number 8, honest, critical, and frank feedback to all candidates. That's a payback for all the time they've taken in this process. So I give to you my final thought. Hiring top performers is serious business for serious people. We tell all of our clients that failing to allocate the required time, capital, resources, and methodologies to this most important of all leadership responsibilities is a failure of the highest order. When mediocre talent is recruited and or retained in an enterprise, the enterprise mediocrity is not far behind. Our clients that hire us, that engage us, approach talent acquisition with genuine seriousness. So do we, and so should you. That's the end of today's presentation. I hope if you've watched this and spent some time, it's giving you some insight into what you're about ready to go through. The process that you are going through or that you are starting is one that could end at any one of those 7 gates, but it's also one of immense personal value to you because, again, we will provide the information back to you if requested. And so I would strongly encourage you to really go through the process, really learn from the process, enjoy it as you can, move it along as fast as you can, and use this to not just help you with this job, but if it doesn't work out for the job we're interviewing you for, we certainly hope it helps you in some other job. And we would certainly like to stay in touch with you and keep you in the dignified loop of our relationships. We really hope and appreciate your assistance, hope for and appreciate your assistance in all these matters, and we wish you the best of luck. My name is Alan Dunn. I'm president of GDI Consulting and Training Company, and I'm happy to have spent this time with you. Best of luck in the acquisition process. Bye-bye now.